So much disinformation in the news. Some cyber guy got on TV and said that with a few clicks in settings, you can stop location tracking on your iPhone. Sounds good if only the information is correct, but it is not. This is the normie understanding, and it is fundamentally way off. It is wrong because people have the impression that it is possible to fix your current normie phone to have some location privacy. Unfortunately, if you have an iPhone or Google Android, then there is no way to stop location tracking. The only actual answer is to change phones to specialty phones that defeat the big tech tricks. This topic got in the news because the 2000 Mules movie showed how people were tracked at voter drop-off boxes, and the mainstream media ignored this and downplayed location tracking. Except that the FTC just this week sued the location broker Kochava for allegedly selling data that can track people at abortion clinics and places of worship. Interesting that people pay attention to this only when it matches their political side. Then it gets personal. So as you can see, location tracking is of concern to all. So now it's time to actually understand the sources of the threats and how to fix it. So stay right there. First, you have to understand where the location threat comes from. This is actually a little complicated because there's the data that third parties have been able to acquire. And then there is the data hoarded by Apple and Google, which I will focus on later. This is actually the biggie. The first location threat is more obvious, and it is the source of the data supposedly used in the 2000 Mules movie and the sole data that is the subject of the FTC lawsuit with Kochava. It is also the source of data that was used by some investment firm to basically spy on Tesla. Using location data, this company tracked the counts of people at the Tesla plant to see if Tesla was hiring new employees and how much. That was then used to accurately predict if production quotas were being met. And that investment firm, I'm sure, made a ton of money after the quarterly earnings announcement because of this inside information. What I will show is that location data comes obviously from the phones, but only some of it is accessible by third parties, and that can be turned off if the average user wasn't so cavalier about leaving location settings on. But the part that is not clearly understood are the machinations of big tech that track locations constantly, 24/7 in various ways, and under cover of obscured claims of privacy protections which don't actually exist. Locations known to Apple and Google are more dangerous because they clearly know which particular phone it is and your identity. Exactly. Location tracking doesn't worry many of you. You think this: so what if they know I'm at the market or at work? My life is boring. And then extend the topic to something more touchy, like a presence at a ballot box, a demonstration, an abortion clinic, or a Jewish temple, and people start to get antsy. Ah, you finally realize that this is something to worry about. Even though I've been pounding this into people's heads for years. Let's start with the easy part. The location data that is sold comes from mobile apps. If an app knows your location, you ought to worry if it can sell that location, together with your identity. Many apps are free nowadays, and the apps want to monetize. So there are plenty of ways to monetize. One way is to allow ads on the app. The apps show you ads, but it's not like showing you a video of an ad. What actually happens is that the space is allocated on the app, and the advertising wholesaler, usually Google, takes over the space on the app and bids the space for sale. Here, the advertising wholesaler bids the space out, and the advertising retailer puts their own programming code in, which often includes not just the ad itself, but the trackers to collect information on the phone, like location, IP addresses, and other identifiers. An example app is the Weather Channel app, which is owned by IBM. The Weather Channel definitely funds itself through these ads and also the sale of location data. This location data is purchased by location aggregation brokers like Here.com, Skyhook Wireless, Kochava, and so on. This is the source of the location data. You can, for example, do something like geofencing, specify a location and see who was there over time. And this data is available with timestamps. This is the part that you can turn off. This is the only thing that most people get right. If you disable locations on your phones, then apps cannot capture the location data. It's that simple. Although on iPhones, you've got to really dig through the privacy settings since there are separate settings related to advertisers. So are we cool here? Just turn off location permissions and you're good to go? Hell no. Yeah, this works for third-party apps, but does nothing to anything controlled by the OS maker itself, meaning Apple and Google. So just so we have a basic understanding here, your phones have a GPS receiver and it basically runs all the time. There really isn't a switch on a typical phone that can turn it off. Now the mobile OS can block access to the GPS data to an app via permissions. The mobile OS is either iOS or Android. But here's the part that people don't understand. You cannot block location from the mobile OS. The mobile OS is the gatekeeper of your location data. Now, the level of location tracking varies by OS. To be frank with you, the more insidious location tracking occurs on an iPhone. So it is the worst offender of tracking that I know of. Let's start with what's common with iOS and Google Android. Both OSs collect location data 24/7 for a process called Wi-Fi scanning, and I failed to come up with a term that describes this better because Wi-Fi scanning can mean multiple things. The general point is that your phones are constantly searching for Wi-Fi routers and their identifiers called MAC addresses. This then is matched to your GPS position and signal strengths of the routers. Google and Apple need this information because they are collecting a database of every single Wi-Fi router in existence and where it is. This is then used to find you indoors when GPS is not working, using a technique called Wifi Triangulation. Sometimes I get comments from naysayers, stupidly I may add, even from cybersecurity people who argue this point with me. It is clear that Google and Apple collect information on Wi-Fi routers and their locations because they said so. This information used to be collected using Google Street View cars and Skyhook Wireless cars and so on. Now they just use the phones to collect it. The hacker Sammy Camcar actually broke into the Google database that had the raw data for this. So there is no doubt that this data exists. And now any programmer can access location data through Google using the Google Geolocation API. Just specify the router MAC addresses and signal strength of at least 2 routers and your location will be revealed within 6 feet. Now the problem is that the cybersecurity researchers don't know exactly how this data is collected from the phone. So their answer is that if they can't find out how, then it must not exist. Such a stupid analysis when the geolocation API is there, the data is there, and we all know how Wi-Fi triangulation works. I know exactly how it collects this data using something called Wi-Fi Promiscuous mode, something available to hackers since the early 2000s. I know this tech stuff will go in one ear and out the other. But just understand that your phone collects this data 24/7 and you can't stop it. You can't stop it because Google and Apple both need the data. So this is the funny part. Though it is clear that your phone has to pass the locations to Apple and Google off the Wi-Fi routers, we're supposed to assume that Apple and Google closes their eyes at the location data and calls it anonymous? Even though it is clear what the Google ID and Apple ID is off the phone? Yeah, right. Let's face the reality. Your phones emit location data constantly to Apple and Google. Your phones are logged in with an Apple ID and Google ID. They always know where the data is coming from. Now let me go on and expand this problem on the Apple side. On the Apple side, this gets extremely worse. The next lie in location tracking comes from the feature called Find My Phone or Find My. The misinformation from Apple is that your phone cannot be found using Find My Phone unless you authorize it on your Apple account to do this. I already told you that the phone constantly sends location. So this is the part that is apparently not understood. Your iPhone sends its location data to Apple even if no one owns the phone and it is sitting at the Apple Store. The location is sent with the serial number of the iOS device. This is extremely important and is helpful, supposedly, for cases of theft. When you activate Find My Phone on your Apple account, you attach this location track to your account so you can see the data. Otherwise, only Apple can see the data. But you see, this information is sold to you as, hey, your location is private until you activate Find My Phone. Let me tell you many other things that just destroy this lie even beyond what I've said. As you Apple fans know, your AirTag can be tracked. But the detail that is important is that the AirTag is tracked by other iPhones in the vicinity. The AirTag is determined to be a certain distance and direction away from the phone, and then the phone has to send its location to Apple so it knows where the AirTag is. Remember, your iPhone will report any AirTag, not just your AirTag, so your location is obviously sent with the AirTag data. Oh yeah, Apple doesn't know who you are because they're good at keeping their eyes closed even if the data comes from your Apple ID and your device serial number. The whole infrastructure of the AirTag is based on every Apple device tracking other Apple devices. The capability to provide data on every AirTag demands that each iPhone is able to provide location information as needed by the ecosystem. And you expect me to believe your location is not tracked? By the way, Apple claims that the AirTag data is encrypted, so the identity of the specific AirTag cannot be determined. Yeah, that's possible. But they don't tell you that the location data is completely separate from that encrypted data, because the AirTag is not sending the data, the iPhone is. Also, here's the part that's not so obvious. An AirTag will reveal all the iPhones in the vicinity, so the AirTag is basically able to do contact tracing. More fairy tales? How about this? Your iPhone, when turned off, becomes an AirTag. So that's how its location can be spotted again by other iPhones. Someone called this disinformation from me, though it was added in iOS 14.5 during the summer a year ago. So with an iOS device, there really is no escape. The tracking of locations is so entrenched into the whole ecosystem in a way that makes it impossible to have any kind of location privacy. Unfortunately, it's the iPhone that needs a Faraday bag for privacy, since you cannot even get that privacy just by turning the phone off. Out of sight, out of mind. Yeah, Apple and Google collect location data, but we don't know who sees it, so it can't be important. Outside of employees of Apple and Google, of course, the general population cannot see the location data from these two companies. So we presume this is safe, which is a weird assumption. But assuming you have complete trust in Apple and Google, let me make clear that this data is there and is retrieved. One particular use is law enforcement. Geofencing is often used to find phones in a certain area. This is used to find suspects near a crime scene. It can also be used to find out who's at a demonstration or a political meeting or who attended a militia group meeting. We already mentioned its use in finding who's going to a ballot box and how frequently, or who's going to an abortion clinic. Yeah, this data is often subpoenaed. It is often in the news. What is not considered is that this data is an abuse of the Fourth Amendment, or a way around it. Unreasonable search and seizure. The point is that the data exists. It exists historically. I'm sure Apple and Google knows the power of this data. It could be used to destroy governments by revealing secret meetings, extramarital affairs, and inappropriate activities of people in power. It could be used to predict contacts between people for mergers and acquisitions, which could be used to make tons of money for whoever has the data. It can be used selectively too to hurt those who might be against them and hide the data for people they are for, too much power, in my opinion, in the hands of Apple and Google. And let me remind you that Apple and Google are contractors for the intelligence community. Apple and Google, per the Snowden revelations, have been participating in the release of data to government via the programs like Muscular, Prism, and X-Keyscore. I say releasing the data, and I should rephrase that. Selling the data to the three-letter agencies, even stated to be so on Wikipedia. Also, there are other ways to track location that don't use a GPS. They instead rely on proximity tracking. I have a full location tracking video which goes through all the possibilities, and I will link it up here. Proximity tracking doesn't know coordinates. It's just saying you were found near X because there was a sensor at X. And since every phone emits a unique and recognizable beacon, the proper sensor can say that you're there. So even without location data, a sensor on location can track the identification data being broadcasted by a phone, such as a Bluetooth MAC address or a Wi-Fi MAC address. These pieces of data are used by government stingray tools or used by phones to do contact tracing. Now, what are these sensors? In the case of Apple, every iOS device is a sensor sensing other devices. It does this through Bluetooth, and it's called the Apple Mesh Network. I made an important video about this. Any tech can build their own sensor as well, and hackers know they can listen into the Bluetooth and Wi-Fi signals which reveal the MAC addresses. These are unique identifiers. The actual location is then supplied by the sensing device, similar to the iPhone acquiring the location of the AirTag and sending it on to Apple. Both Androids and iPhones have the technology in them to detect other devices in the vicinity, and this was added to allow for contact tracing. So they always are able to know who's near whom, even without a GPS. Law enforcement also use devices called Stingray that also are able to spot phones in the area because phones emit a cell signal that announces the mobile subscriber identity number, or IMSI. You can't actually stop this on any phone unless you remove the SIM card. And of course, the carrier can track your location roughly as well. It is clear that all the modern mobile phones, iOS and Google Androids, are serious tracking devices, and there is no actual way to switch any of these off on a standard device, or what I refer to as a normie device. But people in the privacy field have been coming up with solutions to overcome this. The way to have a privacy phone is to have a phone that is not tied to either Apple or Google. By doing this, then you have full control of who obtains a location from the phone GPS, and it will be only with your permission. The only type of phone that is commercially ready and able to be used as a daily driver is a de-Googled phone. An example of that is the Brax 2 privacy phone, which is on my store and which is based on a different OS. This uses Brax OS. There are other phones that people can self-install with a different OS. Another popular OS is Lineage OS, and there are many others. These OSs are built off an open source Android that has no Google in it. Because there is neither an Apple or Google, there is no location tracking to be sent, and the source code is verified not to have any secret sending of data to Google. Also, the phones have no identity since you did not log in with any Google ID. At the moment, these are the only phones that we can use. You do have to make some sacrifices since not every app can work, though most do. You can watch the video on the Google phones to understand the implications. There are other phones that can do the job in the future, like the Linux phones. One that I own is a Pine phone. They still have issues though, so they're experimental at this stage. Hopefully they'll be ready for prime time soon. To summarize my point, a standard phone tracks locations, and you cannot turn it off. So any attempt at sugarcoating this is a fake promise at best and misinformation at worst. If you stick with your standard phone, then expect that you will not be able to stop location tracking. You could use a Faraday bag to stop it with physical means. That's about the only method available to you. My company offers products that are designed to promote your privacy from digital surveillance. There's Bytes VPN, a metadata-free email Brax Mail, and the Brax 2 privacy phone. All these products are on my app, Brax Me. The link is in the description. I'm on other platforms. I'm on rumble.com and Odysee.com. In case I get the platform, please follow me on these platforms. The links are in the description. Thanks for watching and see you next time.